What if the greatest honor of your life was actually a trap? That night, the award for Architectural Innovation of the Year felt heavy in my hands, a solid block of polished steel and walnut. It was a tangible summary of 1,000 sleepless nights and a million tiny decisions, but I didn't yet know its true cost. It was the validation I had craved for 15 years. A statement that Vance Design Studio was a name that stood on its own, not just a footnote to my family's legacy. The grand ballroom of the Brown Palace Hotel was a glittering sea of black ties and sequins. Flashes from cameras popped around me, momentarily blinding me as I made my way back to our table. My business partner, Liam, was already on his feet. His usually cynical face split by a grin so wide it looked painful. He wrapped me in a hug that lifted me off the floor. "We did it, Jules. I told you the sustainable energy grid for the Northwood Community Center was a winner." I laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of pure, unadulterated relief. We had poured everything into that project for 2 years. Our small firm had competed against giants, companies with entire departments dedicated to just writing proposals, and we won. It felt like the summit of a mountain I had been climbing my whole life. I looked around the room, at the faces of my peers, some smiling, some offering polite nods. This was respect. Earned. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a persistent, insistent vibration against my palm. I ignored it, wanting to soak in the moment. People were swarming our table, offering handshakes and congratulations. "Brilliant work, Julia." A well-deserved win. But the phone buzzed again, and then a third time. Liam glanced at the caller ID over my shoulder. "It's your uncle," he murmured, his smile tightening just a fraction. "The king calls to congratulate the princess." I excused myself and stepped out onto a small balcony overlooking the Denver skyline. The crisp October air was a welcome shock after the stuffy ballroom. I answered on the fourth buzz. "Uncle Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice steady over the pounding in my ears. His voice boomed through the phone, so loud I had to pull it away from my ear. "Jules, my girl. What a show. I saw the pictures online. You're making the Vance name proud, truly proud." "Thank you, Uncle Richard. It was a big night for the firm." I could hear the clinking of ice in a glass on his end, the sound of a man in his element, even over the phone. He was the patriarch, the sun around which our entire family orbited. A call from him was never just a call. It was an event. "Big night?" He chuckled. "Honey, this is just the beginning. I saw your work on that community center. The lines, the vision. I'm ready. I am ready to trust you with the most important project of my life." I leaned against the cold iron of the railing, my heart starting to race for a completely different reason. What could be more important than the commercial skyscrapers he was known for? "What do you mean, Uncle?" His voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial, grand, as if he were bestowing a knighthood. "My new house, Jules. My legacy home up in Aspen. I've been waiting for the right artist to build it. And tonight, I realized that artist has been in my own family all along." A wave of dizziness and exhilaration washed over me. Richard Vance's personal residence. It wouldn't just be a house. It would be a monument. A sprawling, ambitious, no-expense-spared masterpiece that architects would study for decades. It was the kind of project that turned a successful firm into a legendary one. Forget the award in my clutch. This was the real prize. This was the validation I never even dared to dream of. "Uncle Richard, I'm speechless. That's an incredible honor." "Of course it is," he boomed, his good humor returning. "It's the Vance blueprint, kid. You and me. We'll talk details tomorrow. Celebrate tonight. You've earned it." He hung up before I could say another word. I stood there for a long moment, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of color. The phone felt impossibly light in my hand now. An honor, he'd called it. The project of a lifetime. And in that moment, standing on the pinnacle of my career, I believed him. I truly believed him. The elevator to Uncle Richard's penthouse was a silent, chrome-plated box that shot up 37 floors in under a minute. It was designed to impress, to remind you how far above the rest of the world you were. How do you maintain your footing when you're that high up? As I stepped out into his private foyer, greeted by an impassive marble statue, I felt the professional buzz from the awards ceremony curdle into a familiar mix of awe and anxiety. His apartment was less a home and more a gallery of his own success. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic god's-eye view of the Rocky Mountains. The furniture was sparse, modern, and looked like it had been curated by a museum. He was standing by a massive oak table, a single malt in his hand, dressed in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. He wasn't smiling. He was beaming. "There she is, the star of the family. Come, come, I have something to show you." He led me to a wall that I thought was just dark, polished wood. He pressed a hidden panel and the wall slid away to reveal a state-of-the-art presentation room. A holographic projector hummed to life in the center of the room, casting a three-dimensional, shimmering image of a building into the air between us. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a house. It was a declaration. It was a structure of glass, steel, and stone that didn't just sit on the mountain. It grew out of it, cantilevered over a sheer cliff face, with a waterfall integrated into its core. I stepped closer, my mind racing, instinctively deconstructing the impossible angles and audacious design. This is beyond ambitious, Uncle Richard. This is a structural engineering marvel. The geothermal integration alone is revolutionary. My imagination was on fire. I could already see the way the morning light would hit the western facade, the way the sound of the water would echo through the main atrium. This was a legacy. A project that would define a career. My career. "I knew you'd get it," he said, his voice thick with satisfaction. He gestured toward the hologram with his glass. "The best materials, the best technology. No compromises. 10,000 square feet of pure art. This is the Vance blueprint, Julia. A testament. What do you think?" I couldn't stop circling the floating image, my brain already solving problems, sketching solutions in the air. "I think it's magnificent. I think it's the most exciting design I've ever seen." I finally turned to face him, my head full of load-bearing calculations and preliminary material lists. It was time to bring this dream down to earth. "Okay," I said, shifting into professional mode. The next logical step would be for my team to analyze these initial schematics. We'll need to do a geological survey of the site, and then I can begin to draft a preliminary contract and work up a comprehensive budget and timeline for you. I said it with the same confident tone I used with every new client. Uncle Richard let out a hearty laugh, a deep, booming sound that echoed in the cavernous room. It was a sound I'd heard all my life at family gatherings, usually after he'd told a joke at someone else's expense. He walked over and put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "A contract? My dear girl? A contract?" He shook his head, still chuckling as if I'd just said the most charmingly naive thing in the world. He looked me right in the eye, his smile wide and utterly devoid of understanding. "Honey, we're family," he said, his voice dropping to a warm, conspiratorial tone. "You do this for your old uncle. You pour your heart into it. And I'll cover all the costs for the materials, of course. Every single nail. Think of it. This will be your masterpiece in the Vance Design Studio portfolio, a monument that will make you famous." The weight of his hand on my shoulder suddenly felt crushing. The incredible view from the window behind him no longer looked like an opportunity. It looked like the bars of a beautiful, inescapable cage. The coffee in my hand had gone cold, but I hadn't noticed. Back in the familiar, controlled chaos of our studio, the holographic mirage from my uncle's penthouse felt like a fever dream. How do you explain to your business partner that you've just been handed the key to the kingdom, but the door is a trap? Liam was at the central drafting table, sketching, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as I entered, a hopeful question in his eyes. He saw my face and his expression immediately changed. That bad, huh? Did he hate the preliminary concepts? I sank into my chair, the award from the night before sitting on my desk like a cruel joke. Worse, I said, the word tasting like ash. He loved them. He wants to build it. He wants Vance Design Studio to do everything. Liam's face lit up. Jules, that's incredible. This is it. This is the project that puts us on the national map. He doesn't want to pay us, Liam. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and absurd. Liam blinked, then gave a short, sharp laugh, expecting a punchline. When he saw I was serious, the color drained from his face. What do you mean, he doesn't want to pay? Like, he wants a discount? A family rate? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cold coffee before answering. No, I mean zero. He'll cover materials. He called it a portfolio piece. An honor. For a full minute, there was only the sound of the server humming in the corner. Liam slowly put down his pencil, his movements precise, as if he were handling a bomb. An honor, he repeated, his voice flat and dangerous. Does he know what a project of that magnitude entails? The army of consultants we'll need? The geotechnical surveys? The structural engineers? The environmental impact reports? Just the billable hours for our own team would be. He trailed off, walking over to the large monitor on the wall. He pulled up the initial files I had secretly downloaded from Richard's system. For the next 2 hours, we didn't speak. We worked. We crunched numbers, cross-referenced contractor estimates, and calculated man-hours with a grim, methodical focus. The figures scrolled across the screen, climbing higher and higher, a digital mountain of debt. We were a small firm, just me, Liam, and 2 junior architects. This project wasn't a side gig, it was an all-consuming monster. Finally, Liam leaned back, running both hands through his hair. He pointed a shaking finger at the final number on the screen. It was a figure well over $1.5 million, and that was just our firm's architectural and project management fees. It didn't even include the platoon of specialized engineers we'd have to hire and manage. That's a year, Julia. A full year, maybe more, where our entire firm does nothing but build your uncle a free palace. We'd be out of business in 6 months. He was right. The number didn't lie. It was a business-ending, life-ruining request. And yet, the shame was a knot in my stomach. The family obligation. The voice of my uncle saying, "We're family." Was I being ungrateful? Was this a test? My mind raced, searching for an escape route that wasn't a declaration of war. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Okay, what if we find a compromise? What if we show him the number, but we offer him a discount he can't refuse? Liam just stared at me. What kind of discount are we talking about? 10%? 15? I took a deep breath, feeling like a traitor to him, to our firm, to myself. I'm thinking 70%. A 70% family discount. It's a huge number. An insane gift. He'll see the value we're offering. He has to. He's a businessman. He'll understand. Liam looked at me as if I'd lost my mind, but he saw the desperation in my eyes and simply nodded, too disgusted to argue. I spent the next hour drafting the most carefully worded proposal of my life. I detailed the scope, the market value, the sheer volume of work. And at the bottom, I applied the discount. It felt like slicing off a part of my own body. I attached the PDF to a new email, my finger hovering over the send button. This was my olive branch, my attempt to build a bridge between his world of infinite power and my world of payrolls and professional ethics. With a click, it was gone. All I could do now was wait and pray for his understanding. What's worse than an outright rejection? The agonizing hum of silence. For 2 full days after I sent that proposal, my carefully constructed bridge of logic and compromise, the only reply was a void. I checked my email every 5 minutes, my stomach twisting into a tighter knot with each refresh. Liam tried to be optimistic. "He's a busy man, Jules. He's probably running it by his accountants. He'll see the value. 70% off is practically a gift." But I knew my uncle. Richard Vance was not a man who took 2 days to make a decision. He was a man who made the world wait for his. The call came on the 3rd morning, a Tuesday. It wasn't his private number. It was my father's. A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. Of course, he was using my dad as an intermediary, a neutral party. "Dad, hi," I answered, my voice brighter than I felt. "Hey, honey," he said. His tone was wrong. It wasn't his usual warm, slightly bumbling greeting. It was heavy, laden with a disappointment that was as familiar to me as the scent of his aftershave. "Your mother and I need to talk to you. I'm putting you on speaker." Suddenly, my office felt airless. I heard the faint echo as my mother's voice joined his. "Julia, we just got off the phone with Richard," she began, without any preamble. "He's very hurt." I could almost hear the capital letter in that word. Hurt. Not angry, not insulted. Hurt. It was the family's ultimate weapon. "What do you mean hurt?" I asked, my hand tightening on my pen. "I sent him a professional business proposal. I offered him a massive discount." My father's voice cut in, strained and tired. "A proposal? Julia, you sent the man a bill. Your own uncle. After everything he's done for this family. For you. You sent him a bill? How could you?" I tried to explain, to inject some of the real-world logic that governed my life. "Dad, it's not a bill. It's how my business works. I have employees. I have a payroll to meet. Liam, the junior architects. Their salaries don't get paid with portfolio pieces. The discount I offered was already more than we can afford." "Don't talk to us about your business," my mother snapped, her voice sharp with a frustration that wasn't entirely her own. I could feel Richard's influence bleeding through the phone. "This is about family. This is your chance. A chance he is giving you to become a world-class architect. He believes in you, and you throw it back in his face over money? Don't be so mercenary, Julia. We didn't raise you to be like that." Mercenary. The word hit me like a physical slap. All my years of hard work, the sacrifices, the risks of starting my own firm, all of it reduced to a petty, greedy grab for cash. I could hear them breathing on the other end, a united front of manufactured indignation. They didn't understand the numbers, and they didn't want to. They only understood the simple, brutal hierarchy of our family. Richard was at the top, and his feelings were paramount. My financial survival, the survival of the business I had built from nothing, didn't even register. They weren't my advocates. They were his messengers, his human shields. "You've embarrassed us, honey," my father said, his voice dropping, which was always worse. It was his, "I'm not angry, I'm just deeply disappointed" voice. "You've offended the head of our family. He called us because he was too upset to even speak to you directly. You need to fix this. Call him, apologize, and tell him you'll take the project." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving only the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The silence I had been dreading for 2 days was finally broken, and it was replaced by something infinitely worse: the unified voice of my family, telling me my worth was nothing compared to my uncle's whim. Have you ever questioned your own motives? After my parents hung up, their accusations echoed in the sudden, deafening quiet of my studio. Mercenary. Ungrateful. The words circled me like vultures. I stared at the polished steel award on my desk. Just a few days ago, it was a symbol of my independence. Now it felt like evidence for the prosecution. Was I being selfish? Maybe they were right. Richard had helped my parents secure the loan for their house years ago. He'd paid for my cousin's Ivy League education. My own success was, in part, built on the foundation of the stable life his influence had provided for our family. Maybe this was how you paid those debts. Maybe the price of a seat at the family table was your professional soul. The gnawing doubt followed me into my car. I had a meeting with a potential new client, a developer named Mark Thompson who was planning a boutique hotel in the Highlands. I needed to focus, to be the award-winning architect he was expecting, not the confused niece caught in a web of emotional blackmail. I tried to compartmentalize, to build a wall in my mind between Julia Vance, the business owner, and Julia Vance, the niece. But the wall was crumbling. The pressure was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. The meeting started well. Thompson was sharp, decisive, and he respected our portfolio. We spread the blueprints across a wide table in a sunlit conference room, and for an hour, I lost myself in the familiar comfort of my work. We talked zoning variances, structural load, and the specific aesthetic of reclaimed timber versus brushed steel. This was my language. In this room, I wasn't Richard Vance's niece. I was the principal architect of Vance Design Studio. I felt the ground solidify beneath my feet again. We were close to a deal. I could feel it. This project would be a lifeline, proof that we could survive without my uncle's poisoned chalice. As we were shaking hands, packing up our portfolios, Thompson smiled warmly. I have to say, Julia, you've got a lot on your plate. It's impressive. I gave a polite, non-committal laugh. It's been a busy year. He nodded, gathering his papers. I'll say, I ran into a few of your uncle's people at a charity luncheon last week. They couldn't stop talking about the Aspen project. Sounds like a monster. Richard Vance is a serious man. Good luck with that. He said it casually. A simple piece of industry gossip, a friendly acknowledgement of a shared world. He had no idea he had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my life. My blood ran cold. The conference room, which had felt so full of promise moments before, suddenly felt like a tomb. How did he know? How did anyone know? My uncle hadn't just been silent, he'd been busy. He hadn't bothered to negotiate with me because he had already moved on to the next phase of his plan: public relations. He was cementing the narrative in the minds of the entire Denver business community. It wasn't a proposal anymore. It was a fact. Julia Vance is building my house. My smile felt like a cheap mask glued to my face. It's a very ambitious project. Yes, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. I don't remember the drive back to the office. My mind was a maelstrom of horrified realization. He had outmaneuvered me so completely it was almost elegant in its cruelty. This was never a negotiation. It was a coronation. He had announced his decision, and I was expected to kneel. If I refused now, it wouldn't be a private family disagreement. It would be a public scandal. I would be the architect who couldn't handle the big leagues, the niece who betrayed her powerful uncle. He had taken my reputation, the very thing I had spent 15 years building, and taken it hostage. I walked into my studio and saw Liam at his desk. He looked up, took one look at my face, and the hopeful question in his eyes died. I didn't have to say a word. He knew. I sank into my chair and looked at the award on my desk, the symbol of my great triumph. Was there a more perfect trap than one that looked exactly like the prize you'd always wanted? I finally understood. He hadn't just put me in a golden cage. He had managed to convince the entire world it was a throne. How much pressure can a single point withstand before it shatters? For days, I had been absorbing the force of my uncle's ambition, my parents' disappointment, and the industry's expectations. I felt compressed, diminished, but I was still holding. Then came the phone call that had nothing to do with architecture and everything to do with demolition. It was from my younger brother, Alex. His voice was a frantic mix of elation and despair. He'd just been accepted into a prestigious graduate program for aeronautical engineering, a once-in-a-lifetime shot. The problem? A critical scholarship he'd been counting on had been unexpectedly canceled due to budget cuts. He needed $20,000 for the first year's tuition. In 6 weeks. My first instinct was pure, uncomplicated love. Don't worry, Alex. We'll figure it out. Let me talk to Mom and Dad. I hung up and immediately called them, a dozen fundraising ideas already swirling in my head. We could co-sign a loan. I could pull from my personal savings. But my mother's voice on the phone was weary, defeated before the battle had even begun. Oh, Julia, we know. We're sick about it. But we just don't have it. After the roof repairs last year, everything is so tight. My father added his own apologetic mumble in the background. They couldn't help. The people I expected to be my first line of support were a brick wall of quiet resignation. An hour later, my phone rang again. It was my Aunt Sarah, Richard's wife. Her voice was syrupy sweet, oozing a conspiratorial warmth that always set my teeth on edge. Jules, honey, I just heard about poor Alex. It's just terrible. I'm calling you in secret, you understand. Richard would be furious if he knew I was meddling. She paused for dramatic effect. Listen, he and I were just talking last night. He was saying how much he wants to help Alex, how he sees him as the son he never had. He's just waiting, honey. Waiting for what? My silence was her cue. He just wants to see some family loyalty from your side of the family, she cooed, the words dripping with false sympathy. He feels so hurt by this whole house business. He said to me, Sarah, the second Julia shows me she's part of this family again and gets started on the plans, I'll write a check for Alex's entire education. Isn't that wonderful? He's willing to solve all your problems, Julia. All you have to do is say yes. I said nothing. My throat was too tight to form words. This wasn't an offer. It wasn't a solution. It was a hostage negotiation, and my brother's future was the price. It was the most brilliant, evil thing I had ever witnessed. It was perfect. The timing, the delivery, the use of my kind, gentle aunt as the messenger. The pressure I had been feeling for days didn't just increase, it changed state. It was no longer a weight crushing me. It was a catalyst. The doubt, the guilt, the desperate need to compromise. It all burned away in an instant. And in its place was a feeling so pure and so cold it was almost serene. It was the quiet, calm certainty of a person who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The war wasn't about a contract anymore. It was about survival. The part of me that had been afraid of my uncle was gone. In its place stood an architect, ready to design his defeat. There's a unique clarity that comes after an explosion. Once the shockwave passes and the ringing in your ears subsides, you see the landscape for what it truly is. After my aunt's phone call, the tangled mess of guilt, obligation, and fear was gone, blasted into dust. All that remained was the stark, simple architecture of the truth. This was never about family. It was about power. My uncle didn't want a loving niece to build his home. He wanted to own the award-winning architect who happened to be his niece. I walked back into the main studio where Liam was staring blankly at a blueprint, the energy drained from the room. He looked up, his face a mask of weary resignation. "Let me guess," he said, his voice flat. "They found another lever to pull." I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the coffee machine, my movements calm and deliberate. I brewed a fresh pot, the methodical process grounding me. He had used my brother. He had taken the purest thing in my life, my love for my family, and twisted it into a weapon to be used against me. "He did," I finally said, turning to face Liam, my voice devoid of the panic he expected. "He's holding my brother's tuition hostage." Liam swore, a single violent word that ripped through the quiet studio. He stood up, ready to rage, ready to tell me to burn it all down. But he stopped when he saw my eyes. He saw the fire was gone, replaced by something much colder and harder. "What are we going to do, Julia?" he asked, his tone shifting from anger to caution. He wasn't talking to a victim anymore. "We are going to stop fighting a battle of emotion," I said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "We've been trying to appeal to his heart, his sense of fairness. It was a fatal design flaw. The man's heart is a boardroom. So, that's where we're going to fight him." I spent the rest of the night at the office. Liam stayed with me. We didn't talk about family or feelings. We worked. We transformed our 70% off plea into a declaration of war, waged with spreadsheets and timelines. This was no longer a compromise. It was a counteroffensive. I pulled every file, every projection, every line item related to the Aspen house. We built a presentation so detailed, so overwhelmingly professional, it was irrefutable. We created charts breaking down the man-hours for every single phase, from initial geological survey to final interior finishes. We listed every consultant, every engineer, every specialist required, along with their market rate fees. We presented the project not as a house, but as a multi-million-dollar commercial venture, which it was. By 3 in the morning, fueled by coffee and a cold, righteous fury, we had 2 documents ready. The first was a master service agreement, the kind of ironclad 100-page contract a corporation like his would use. It listed the total project cost down to the last cent, $1,750,000. No discounts, no family rates. The second document was my masterstroke. It was a single, beautifully designed page. At the top, in our firm's elegant font, it said, "Vance Design Studio, Gift Certificate." Below, it specified a one-time professional services credit. This certificate represents a gift, in celebration of family, in the amount of $350,000. 20%. A number that was generous but not suicidal. A gift, not a discount. A grant from a position of power, not a concession from a position of weakness. I was no longer asking him to value my work. I was telling him what it was worth, and then, as an act of my own volition, I was gifting him a piece of it. The choice was now his: accept my professional terms, or publicly reject his family's generosity. The cage he had built for me was about to become his own. The invitation to Sunday lunch was a summons, not a request. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the verdict has already been decided? The air in my uncle's penthouse was thick with the cloying scent of roasted lamb and the silent, crushing weight of expectation. My parents sat huddled together on a massive white sofa, avoiding my gaze. My cousins were there, their children, a whole curated audience for my public surrender. Richard was holding court by the fireplace, a glass of red wine in his hand, looking every bit the magnanimous king about to receive tribute. He let the charade of pleasantries continue through the appetizer course. He asked about my parents' garden, complimented my aunt's dress, and then, as the main course was served, he turned the full force of his attention on me. He smiled, a slow, predatory spreading of his lips. "So, Julia, my star," he said, his voice booming so everyone could hear. "We're all family here. Why don't you tell everyone the wonderful news? When are you ready to get started on the Vance blueprint?" The clinking of silverware stopped. Every eye in the room was on me. The ambush was complete. The tribunal was in session. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I took a slow sip of water, placed my napkin deliberately on the table, and rose from my chair. A confused murmur rippled through the room. This wasn't in the script. I wasn't supposed to move. I was supposed to capitulate. I walked to the corner where I'd left my laptop bag and retrieved my computer. "Actually, Uncle Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, clear and calm. "I'm glad you brought it up. I've prepared a short presentation that details the full scope of the project for everyone." Before he could object, I walked to his 85-inch television, a monument to his wealth, and connected my laptop with an HDMI cable. His smiling, benevolent face on the screensaver was replaced by the crisp, professional logo of Vance Design Studio. My parents looked horrified. My aunt's jaw was slack. My uncle's smile had frozen, the confident warmth replaced by a flicker of disbelief. The first slide appeared. A detailed project timeline, a complex web of dependencies and phases stretching out over 18 months. I had turned his family living room into my boardroom. For the next 10 minutes, I spoke. I didn't speak to my uncle. I spoke to the room as if they were a board of directors. I walked them through the geological survey requirements, the structural engineering challenges, the army of consultants, the thousands of projected man-hours. I showed them charts illustrating the financial outlay, the market value of every phase. I used the language of his world: ROI, asset management, capital investment. I was no longer his niece asking for a favor. I was a professional outlining the terms of a massive, high-risk venture. When the last slide faded, I walked to the marble coffee table where he sat, suddenly looking small in his oversized armchair. I placed 2 documents on the polished surface. "Uncle Richard, I will be absolutely honored and thrilled to build your home. It's a magnificent vision." I pushed the first document, the ironclad, full-price contract, toward him. "Here is the official master service agreement for the project." Then I slid the second, elegant document next to it. "And this," I said, my voice softening just enough to make the words land like stones, "is my gift to the family. I cannot gift you my business, but I can gift you this." The room was utterly silent. He stared at the 2 pieces of paper, the bill and the gift, as if they were a snake and a mongoose, locked in a battle he had never anticipated. Silence in a room full of people can be louder than a bomb. For a long moment after I placed the documents on the table, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. My uncle stared at the contract and the gift certificate, his face a thundercloud of compressed fury. The benevolent patriarch had vanished, replaced by a CEO whose authority had been publicly challenged. He looked up at me, and his eyes were not the eyes of family. They were chips of ice. He had expected a tearful apology, a quiet surrender. What he got was a corporate takeover of his own living room. He pushed the papers away with the back of his hand, a gesture of supreme dismissal. "This lunch is over," he announced, his voice a low growl that vibrated with barely contained rage. He stood up, towering over the table. "I don't know what kind of circus you think you're running, Julia, but you have fundamentally misunderstood your place in this family." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The cold, precise anger in his voice was far more terrifying. He had lost control. And for a man like Richard Vance, that was the ultimate sin. The room erupted in a flurry of motion. My aunt rushed to my uncle's side, murmuring placating words. My cousins suddenly found their children fascinating, bustling them toward the door without making eye contact with me. It was like watching a flock of birds scatter at the sound of a gunshot. I was the gunshot. In the chaos, my father grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "What have you done?" he hissed, his face pale with a mixture of fear and fury. "You humiliated him. You humiliated us." "I presented a business proposal," I said, my voice shaking slightly, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade, leaving a hollow chill in its wake. My mother was already in tears. "A proposal? You staged a spectacle. You turned our family into a negotiation. Richard has done so much for us, Julia. He deserved your respect, not this stunt." They didn't see my professionalism as a strength. They saw it as a betrayal. They weren't angry that he had tried to exploit me. They were angry that I had refused to be exploited, and in doing so, had upset the delicate, toxic balance of power. I was herded out of the penthouse along with the rest of the scattering family, an outcast from my own tribe. The elevator ride down was a silent torture chamber shared with my parents. They sat on opposite sides of the car, staring at the floor, radiating a disappointment so profound it felt like a physical force. They didn't say another word until we were standing on the curb, the city noise a jarring contrast to the frozen silence between us. "Don't call us for a few days, Julia," my father said, not looking at me. We need some time." Then they got in their car and drove away, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. The days that followed were defined by a profound and unnerving silence. My calls to my parents went straight to voicemail. My texts to my brother, who I knew must have been caught in the crossfire, were met with short, non-committal replies. Even my aunt, the syrupy sweet messenger of my uncle's ultimatum, didn't answer. It was a coordinated, systematic shunning. I had won the battle, but in doing so, I had been excommunicated. I sat in my quiet studio, the award on my desk now seeming like a relic from another lifetime, and wondered if the price of my integrity was my entire family. What is the sound of a career dying? It's silence. A week passed after the disastrous Sunday lunch, 7 entire days marked by a profound and chilling quiet. The phone on my desk, usually a source of constant buzzing opportunity, became a black, mocking rectangle. Every time it remained still, it confirmed my new status as a pariah. I imagined the whispers at the Denver club, the knowing glances at industry events. Richard Vance was a king, and I had attempted a coup in his own court. Kings do not suffer traitors to thrive in their kingdoms. Liam was a rock, trying to keep a veneer of normalcy in the office, but we both felt it. The air was thick with unspoken fear. We had lost the Vance project, and I had likely torched any goodwill associated with the Vance name. The award on my desk felt like a tombstone for a career that had peaked and died in the same week. Was this the price? Was professional integrity a luxury you could only afford if you had no powerful relatives? The silence was my answer. It told me I had not only lost my family, but I had also lost my future. Then, on Friday afternoon, the phone rang. The caller ID was not a number I recognized, but a name: Sterling Developments. My blood turned to ice. Arthur Sterling was one of the biggest developers in the state, a titan of the industry. He was also my uncle's most public and bitter rival. They had been battling over zoning, contracts, and architects for 20 years. My first thought was that Richard had sent him to finish me off, a final, public execution. My hand trembled as I answered, my voice a dry croak. "Julia Vance." His voice was like gravel rolling downhill, deep and commanding. "Ms. Vance, Arthur Sterling, I've been hearing things." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I braced myself, my mind racing through potential accusations. Mr. Sterling, I'm not sure what you might have heard. He cut me off with a short, humorless laugh. Don't be modest. The grapevine in our business is faster than fiber optics. I heard you went head-to-head with Richard Vance on his vanity project in Aspen and walked away with your spine intact. That's a rare thing. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. He wasn't calling to bury me. He was calling to... What? He continued, his voice all business. I don't like Richard. I think he's a bully who mistakes his wallet for a personality. But I respect his eye for talent. He wouldn't have tapped you if you weren't the best. He paused, and I could hear him shuffling papers on his end. Anyone who could put Richard Vance in his place and make him the talk of the town is someone who deserves respect. It shows you value your work more than you fear a bully. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, but they didn't hurt. They were a balm, a validation from the most unexpected corner of the universe. He saw my stand not as family betrayal or professional suicide, but as strength. I have a project, Ms. Vance. The new Central Library expansion. It's a public-private partnership. High profile, demanding. A real project, with a real contract and a budget that respects the talent it hires. I think you might be the right architect for the job. Are you interested? I sank into my chair, the crushing weight of the past week lifting from my shoulders so suddenly I felt dizzy. The silence had been broken, not by an enemy, but by an ally I never knew I had. There is no high quite like the one that comes from proving everyone wrong. The Denver Central Library project wasn't just a lifeline, it was a rocket ship. It was complex, public-facing, and creatively liberating in a way my uncle's monument to his own ego could never have been. Liam and I threw ourselves into the work with the desperate energy of survivors. Our studio, once heavy with the silence of impending doom, was now filled with the constant buzz of creation. Passionate arguments over design, the scratch of pencils on trace paper, and the hum of our 3D printers working overtime. We hired 2 more junior architects to handle the increased workload. Seeing our small firm expand, knowing that I was creating jobs and building something meaningful based on my own merit, was a satisfaction far deeper than any family approval could ever provide. I was no longer Richard Vance's niece, the architect. I was Julia Vance, the architect who was redesigning the heart of the city's literary world. The Vance Design Studio name was becoming my own, forged not in the shadow of my family, but in the full sunlight of professional respect. Months passed. The chill from my family began to thaw, not with a sudden heat wave of apologies, but with a slow, almost imperceptible creep of thawing ice. It started with a tentative text from my brother, Alex, telling me he had secured a student loan on his own. Attached was a picture of him in his new university lab, a proud, defiant grin on his face. There was no mention of our uncle. There didn't need to be. It was a declaration of independence, one I understood completely. We were finding our own way outside the golden cage. Then, one evening, my mother called. Her voice was different. The sharp edge of disappointment was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost guilty tone. She didn't apologize. That was a step too far for the Vance family code. But she asked about my work. Genuinely asked. We saw an article in the paper about the library, Julia, she said. The design, it looked beautiful. It was the closest she had ever come to admitting she was proud of my actual work, not just the status it might confer upon the family. She then lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. You know, your uncle is having a terrible time with that house. I stayed silent, letting her talk. He hired some big expensive firm from Chicago. They're charging him a fortune, and they argue about every little thing. He complains constantly that they have no vision, that they don't understand what he wants. I could hear the unsaid words hanging in the air between us. You understood. You would have done it right. It wasn't an apology, but it was something far more valuable. It was a quiet, dawning respect for the professional she had never taken the time to see. The daughter had become an expert in her own right, and the shift in her perception was a tectonic one. A year later, I stood on the fifth-floor scaffolding of the Denver Library's new wing, the wind whipping strands of hair across my face. Below me, the construction site was a symphony of organized chaos, the roar of machinery, the clang of steel on steel, the shouts of the foreman. It was the sound of progress. It was the sound of my future being built rivet by rivet. I looked out over the city, a familiar panorama made new from this vantage point, my vantage point. I felt a deep, unshakable sense of pride, not in an award, but in the tangible reality of the work itself. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a call from a contractor, but it was a picture message from a number I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the name, Chloe, my cousin, Richard's youngest daughter. We hadn't spoken since the infamous Sunday lunch. I opened the message with a sense of trepidation. The photo was taken from inside a massive, half-finished room, looking out through a huge pane of glass. The view of the Aspen Mountains was breathtaking, but that's not what she wanted me to see. In the foreground, clearly visible, was a massive steel support beam that was conspicuously misaligned with the ceiling juncture above it. It was a glaring, amateurish architectural flaw, the kind of mistake that would cost a fortune and weeks of delays to fix. It was a silent testament to the visionless Chicago firm my uncle had hired, but it was the background of the photo that made my heart stop. Far in the distance, nestled in a valley on the other side of the city, was another construction site. It was the library, my project. From his palace of compromised vision, he had a direct line of sight to my triumph. Beneath the photo was a short, simple caption of 4 words that landed with the force of a treatise. "You have a better view." I stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was more than just a comment on the scenery. It was a concession. It was an acknowledgement from inside the castle walls that my path, the one I had fought for, the one that had cost me so much in the short term, was the superior one. I hadn't just built a building, I had built a new foundation for myself, on my own terms, and even my family, in their own quiet, fractured way, was beginning to see it. 2 years after the standoff in my uncle's penthouse, I stood on another stage, in another glittering ballroom, holding another award. Do you know the real difference between the first prize and the second? The first one feels like a destination. The second one feels like a direction. This new award, for the Denver Library expansion, wasn't a validation I craved, but a milestone on a road I had paved myself. It felt lighter in my hands, not because it was less prestigious, but because it carried none of the weight of expectation. It was mine, and mine alone. My parents were in the audience this time, seated at the front table. They weren't there out of obligation. They were there as my loudest cheerleaders. I watched my father, a man who once trembled at the thought of displeasing his older brother, explaining the principles of cantilevered construction to a city councilman. He got most of it wrong, of course, but he did it with a booming, infectious pride that was entirely new. My mother simply watched me, her eyes shining. Later, she hugged me and whispered, "We are so, so proud of the woman you are." The words healed a wound I didn't even realize was still there. We still see my uncle at Christmas and Thanksgiving. The tense drama has been replaced by a carefully maintained, almost corporate neutrality. We are cordial, distant, like 2 executives from rival companies forced to mingle at a charity dinner. He never speaks of his house, which I heard through the family grapevine was finally finished, a full year behind schedule and massively over budget. He never speaks of the library. We talk about the weather. We talk about the economy. We talk about everything and nothing. And in that empty space, there is a strange kind of peace. He never apologized. I never expected him to. But about 6 months ago, a crate was delivered to my office. Inside was a case of Chateau Margaux, a wine so absurdly expensive it was less a beverage and more a financial asset. Tucked into the straw was a small, thick card with his heavy, decisive handwriting. It contained 4 words: "For a job well done." It wasn't an apology. It was a concession. It was the only language he truly respected. An acknowledgement of victory from one power player to another. In his world, that was the highest form of respect he could offer. That evening, I opened one of the bottles with Liam, my brother, and my parents. We toasted to the future. I finally understood that your real family isn't the one that demands loyalty oaths and offers transactions disguised as love. It's the people who show up to help you pack the boxes when you decide to move. It's the ones who see your value clearly and reflect it back to you, not as a debt to be collected, but as a light to be celebrated. A family discount is what you give to people who don't understand your worth. True family insists on paying full price.